if you are going to invest in property, you must accept that it is not as easy as people may think. Just like every profession has its tricks of the trade, property investment is another pursuit that you need to know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, don't be surprised when you make mistakes. The problem with property investment is, though, is that if you make mistakes, it can cost you very dearly. But on the other hand, if you know what you're doing, you can make the easiest money you've ever made and accumulate very large amounts of wealth. So today, we're just going to go through some basic stuff. My name's Damien Patterson. As you can see, there's some books there that I've written with the help of some others too. And today we're going to get on with it. Now, first things first, legal disclaimer. Now, unfortunately, I have to show a legal disclaimer when I do these things for two reasons. First of all, the literal reason of the legal disclaimer, which says that the information you're going to be shown in this presentation is for educational purposes only. It's not to be treated as real estate advice, legal advice, investment advice, or tax advice. General information. If you want to get into investing, you must accept that there's risks associated with investing, and those risks can lose you money. So you need to make sure that you get suitably qualified professionals to assist and advise you in those investments, and your individual circumstances will vary, so they need to be taken into account. We ask you to do that. Talk to us, talk to our associated companies, researchers, etc. But we cannot guarantee any results, and nor can anyone for that matter. Okay, so just so we got that out of the way. The second reason why I show this slide, though, is it shows a reflection of our society. At the moment, probably only 5 to 10% of people are financially well off in any way, shape or form, while everyone else struggles. And I believe, quite sincerely, that a key reason for that is because a lot of people won't accept responsibility for their own decisions when things go badly. When things go well, they say, "Hey, look at me, I'm so successful." When things go poorly, they don't accept responsibility for it. Now the problem is this: mistakes happen to everyone. Things go wrong. That happens to everybody. And but the difference between the successful and the unsuccessful is how you handle it. So it's very important that you accept responsibility for your own decisions and you learn from your mistakes and move forward, rather than seeking to blame somebody else. If you do those things, you will be successful. Right. These are the things we're going to quickly go through today. We're going to talk about Integrity, our company, what we're all about, just so you know who we are and what we do. Then we're going to talk about our investor psychology, how the way to think about investing. We're going to talk about finances, products, structures and interest rates, how lending works. You can't save your way to wealth. You can't get wealthy just by saving some income. You need to invest, and you need to invest in a leveraged way, which is where you borrow the bank's money and invest that money. That's what property investment's all about. That's why it's so effective when done properly. But it's important, if you are going to do that, that you understand all the different types of loans, how they work, etc. Then I'm going to talk about strategy. How do you build a portfolio as quickly as possible? Who makes the most money? Who makes the most money? The guy who's got 10 properties or the guy who's got one when the market goes up 10%? The more properties you own, the better. But we want to make sure, though, that we're doing that in a way which is responsible and risk managed. Location selection. It's actually the location that makes you money in property investing, not the property itself. The market movement is where the big money is, capital growth. So you need to make sure that you're buying in the right markets at the right times wherever possible in order to be successful. And once you've identified the market you want to buy in, that's when you go and choose the property in that market that is most suitable. A bit about me. This story starts over here when I was the youngest of 4 kids growing up in the western suburbs of Sydney. My single mother, she didn't have, she worked pretty hard. She didn't have a lot of money. So I certainly didn't come from money. I started my adult life from scratch. And what I did is run away and join the Australian Army. And I went to Royal Military College, Duntroon, where I was taught some very important, valuable principles. The principal one of that is integrity. And, it's my religion. It's what I believe in. It's integrity is always doing the right thing, even when nobody's watching. But the Royal Military College also gave me a start as an officer in the Army, and that then gave me an opportunity to be deployed overseas. Now, the relevance of that to property investing is that I came back from that tour to East Timor with a lump sum of money in the bank that allowed me to buy my first property and be debt-free in my early 20s. Debt-free as in bad debt, consumer debts, car loans, things like that. So I did that, and but then I made all the mistakes that I what I now call the rookie mistakes of property investing. See, I thought I was pretty smart. I was an officer in the army. I'd been to a war zone. I'd done all these things. I thought, how hard can this property investing thing be? I'd watched some TV shows, read the first chapters of a couple of books, and I suffered from what I now call arrogance and ignorance disease. I underestimated what this property investment thing was all about, and I went and made all the mistakes. I bought locally. I bought a property locally when my market wasn't going anywhere. I bought an old house that had extensive maintenance costs associated with it, and no depreciation. I tried to renovate in the spare time that I didn't have, and I ended up losing money. At the end of my East Timor tour, I had 60 grand in the bank. After I bought and sold that property, I only had 40 in the bank, and I think I got off lightly now in hindsight. But I realised at the time that I had to do something differently because I wasn't making any money. In fact, I'd lost money. I then got deployed to the Middle East, and I came back from that deployment with some more money, and then I started my journey properly, and I studied everything there was to know about property investment. Over about a 2-year period, I read every book that's ever been written in Australia about property investment. You name it, I've read it. And I then started reading books from overseas as well. And I found a whole heap of really interesting things that you just don't get taught in schools. And I'll talk about them in today's webinar. My portfolio then started taking off, and I started making serious amounts of money. In fact, in my last year in the regular army, I made twice my salary in capital growth in my property portfolio. And when that happens to you, when you spend your entire year working your backside off, but yet your property portfolio makes you double that money without you lifting a finger, then you have a realization that actually maybe when I was told to leave school and get a job and work hard to get money, that was bad advice. The easiest way to get money is not to get a job and work for it. The easiest way to get money is to invest for it, if you know what you're doing. And once you realise that, your whole life and your financial circumstances will change. But there's a lot of ideas that get put in our heads by the people around us, and one of those is get a job, buy a house, pay it off. Now, that advice is probably the worst financial advice that you can be given. So, but get a job in order to get a deposit to buy investment properties and then later quit your job. Now, that's really good advice. I then decided I wanted to leave the army, so I went and got a job in the property investment industry. I worked for another company for a year. I wasn't too happy with the situation there without going into the details, so I decided to start my own company, and we're now Integrity Property Investor Services is now into its 6th year, and Integrity Property Education is our education arm of the business, so where we teach people about property investing, and services is then how the part of the business where we help people to do that investing. Righto. Now, throughout the session, you'll see there on your go-to webinar little menu, you can put questions in there. If you do have any questions during the session, just put them in there. And I won't answer them to the end, but I will certainly have some time for answering questions as we go. Okay. As a company, we use the trust-based philosophy. We're all property investors ourselves. We're not salesmen. We believe our job is to solve your problems for you, not to put pressure on you or make you do anything you don't want to do. We don't play any sales games. It's very important to me and to all of our staff that our clients only take actions that they're completely comfortable with, and we don't force any. So we're not these, slick sales people type. We are a company with integrity. A lot of us are ex-military people, and as I say, we're all property investors ourselves as well. The way we help people starts with training, and we run live one-day courses around the country. We also run evening live seminars, and we run webinars like today. So if you want any more information about that, you just go to ipedu.com.au and then go to our training tab, and you'll see all of our live events and webinars are on there. But do that later. Focus on this for now. So first step in helping people is to train them. Second step is to give them a one-on-one coaching. Now, the one-on-one coaching session, the first session is $297, and basically we go through your personal situation and get you going in the right direction. Apply all the lessons we learned from training to your individual circumstances. From there, we then build a plan, and that plan is your plan that you want us to execute on your behalf. And then we give you all the services in doing that, and once you've had those services, you remain supported for life by us. I'm very proud of the company, and we really do focus 100% on our clients and making sure that they are looked after. Okay, so we're going to teach some really cool stuff today. What I want to ask you right now is, what would you do if you won $500,000 in the lotto today? Let's say you went down the newsagent, you bought a scratchy, you scratched it, and there was 3 $500,000 symbols. What would you do with that money? Take a moment to think about it. Perhaps put in your question box your answer, what you would do with $500,000. Would you buy, would you pay off your mortgage? Would you give money to charity? Would you go around the world? What would you do with that money? Okay, we're going to revisit that at the end of this session, and I think you'll be surprised to what happens and whether your number or your plan changes. Okay, so I'm going to teach you some stuff in this session that is very, very groundbreaking stuff if you haven't heard it before, and it will change your life dramatically. Now, the person who taught me this, he had 5 investment properties when he was 30 years of age, but then he lost them in a divorce, and he started, well, he's one of my mentors. Obviously, I've learned from a whole heap of people, but the key concepts I'm going to teach today, I learned from this man. And, he said mines are like parachutes. They only work when they're open. It's an old saying, but he at 30 years of age had to start again, and by age 57 had 76 investment properties. Now, when you've got 76 investment properties, you can make a lot of money pretty easily. Let's just say, for example, the average price of those properties is $333,000, which is probably much more than that. But let's say if every 3 properties he's got, there's $1 million worth of property. So he's got $25 million worth of property. Market moves 10%, he makes $2.5 million, just like that. If you want to be good at this property investing stuff, it's not about being confident. It's about being competent. See, confidence comes from competence. If you're lacking the confidence to take action and go and buy some investment properties or whatever, don't worry about that. Just focus on learning. Focus on increasing your competence. Once you have learnt what you need to do, the confidence will follow. But why do people not succeed in property investing? Well, it's because of a lack of, they have these fundamental limiting beliefs and obstacles. They've got these ideas in their head that have been put there by either themselves or the people around them that are self-defeating ideas or misguided. And often they sound like they sound like they're good, but when the truth is they're not. First one, I don't have the money. A lot of people think that they need to have a cash deposit to buy an investment property. You don't. There's plenty of legitimate ways to buy a property without using any of your own cash. In fact, we teach all of our clients to try and preserve their cash as much as possible, because cash is your number one way of keeping yourself afloat through the ebbs and flows of holding an investment property portfolio. We teach those to our clients. If you don't have the cash, it doesn't mean you can't buy anything. Okay, interest rates. Some people believe that interest rates will skyrocket if they invest in property. Now, the key thing to understand with interest rates in Australia is that interest rates are set by the Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank lends money to the other banks, and then the other banks lend money to you and I. Now, the Reserve Bank interest rate was once set by the government, but in the early 90s that all changed, and they made an independent board of the Reserve Bank and told them to keep the inflation between 2 and 3%. So basically what happens is every month the inflation figures come out and the Reserve Bank board meets, and if inflation is too high they'll put interest rates up, and in turn the banks will put the interest rate up on you. You'll then have less money in your bank account and do less spending, which in turn will slow the economy down and reduce inflation. Conversely, if the economy is stalling, they will drop interest rates. The banks will then drop interest rates in order to keep your business, and then you will then have more money in your bank account and you will then do more spending. And if you do more spending, you'll stimulate the economy, and away we go. Ever since that system's been in place, you can see even on that chart there, you can see interest rates have dropped dramatically and hovered around the 5% mark for the Reserve Bank rate. So interest rates are not going to go up. In fact, right now they're the lowest they've ever been, and it's quite a wonderful situation to be a property investor right now. Tenants from hell. Some people believe that if they buy an investment property, they're going to end up with tenants who do something like that to their property. Now, here's the thing. Avoiding tenants from hell is really easy, actually. I've never had one, and touch wood, I won't. But the first thing is this. You've got to understand what a tenant from hell is. A tenant from hell is a person who has no respect for authority and no respect for other people's possessions, i.e. your property. Now, if a person has no respect for authority and no respect for other people's possessions, it's going to affect other aspects of their life. It's going to affect their employment. They're not going to be in a very highly paid job, if employed at all, because that same attitude is going to force them to lose work and things like that. Now, where do those people live? Well, they live in the low end of the market. Okay, I'm not saying that poor people are bad tenants. I'm saying that bad tenants are poor people, and there's a very important distinction there. Now, and I grew up in a low socioeconomic area, but if you stay away from the low end of the market, you'll stay away from tenants from hell. The other thing you need to do to stay away from tenants from hell is make sure your rental manager loves you. If you're hiring a rental manager, pay them the full amount and send them flowers every year. Because that rental manager is not going, if you do that, that rental manager is not going to put a bad tenant into your property. And also they're going to make sure that if your property is ever vacant, that they give priority to you to get the first tenant. And remember, every week that your property is vacant is a week that you're not getting paid, and you have to pay the mortgage on your own. So tenants from hell, easy to avoid. Stay away from the low end of the market. Make sure that your rental manager loves you. I can't afford it. I find this one interesting. Some people say, I can't afford an investment property, or I'm going to lose my job and I'm worried about, committing myself financially to something. Here's what I say to people. You can't afford not to invest. If you do not invest, you're not going to have any assets that are bringing you a passive income. If you don't have a passive income coming from elsewhere and you lose your job, well, then you're worse off. So it's not an excuse, And if you're buying properties that don't pay for themselves, you're doing it wrong anyway. So if your investment properties are covering their own expenses, then if you lose your job, the situation doesn't actually change, does it? Because if you lost your job, you still have to worry about paying only the rent or the mortgage on the property you're living in. If you've got an investment property or not, it's irrelevant. So you cannot afford not to invest. You need to be accumulating real assets that generate an income. The market will crash. Some people believe that if they buy an investment property, the market will collapse. Now, we have seen property markets collapse. We saw that happen in America, and that's a very different story, and it's important that you understand why. In America, the government over there wanted the poor people who the banks wouldn't lend money to, they wanted them to be able to borrow money. So they started two government banks, one called Freddie Mac and the other called Fannie Mae. And those banks lent money to the people that no one else had lent money to. And they did it in a way which is called a non-recourse loan. So basically, if that person couldn't afford the loan, they could then just leave the keys in the door, ring the bank, and walk away from the property. Now, the problem with all that was this. As soon as they created that, they instantly reduced the number of renters and increased the number of buyers. Now, when you reduce the number of renters, then rents will drop. When you increase the number of buyers, then prices will increase. So what then happened was inflation started to take off. In turn, the American government bank, the Federal Reserve, then had to start raising interest rates in order to keep a lid on the economy. Then what happened was all of those poor people, the interest rates started going up and they couldn't afford it anymore, so they started walking away from their properties. That in turn created a series of automatic foreclosures, and the market started to flood with mortgage foreclosures. In turn, their fire sale prices and then the prices started to drop. Now behind all that was was a whole series of layered securities that related to buying mortgages and a thing called subprime. And subprime was these mortgages that were low security, they were called subprime mortgages, and behind them there were people putting money into them, buying the rights to them and what have you. And as a result, when the market started collapsing, then all of those securities went through as well. and then hence we had the global financial crisis. Now, during all that time, Australia's market didn't collapse. And why is that, do you think? Well, the reason is we don't lend money to idiots in Australia. In fact, it's very hard to borrow money in Australia. So our property market weathered that storm. So if you don't think the Australian property market is secure after such a huge test like that, then I suggest you don't bother investing at all. Analysis paralysis. Some people would buy an investment property tomorrow if only they could find the perfect one. Now, there's no such thing as a perfect investment property. Investment properties are, in effect, little businesses. They have expenses that need to be paid and they have incomes that come in. And you need to, all investment properties do require a little bit of work on your behalf, but not too much. Now, if you're just trying to find the perfect property, then you're probably not going to find it because all of them have things that need to be dealt with. And it's just a matter of accepting that and managing them accordingly. Armchair experts. Now, I had a client, my very first client actually, when I started the company, and I put him into a property that went up $150,000 in 1 year. I was really stoked for him. It was fantastic. He was close to retirement and he needed to do something, and we were able to pull that off for him by doing some sound research and finding those hotspots where to buy a property. And we do that routinely these days. It's in terms of our research, that's our secret weapon to being a good company to service our clients, is doing really good research. But he came to me at the end of the first year, and we bought 2 more properties off the back of that first one. He came to me at the end of that year and he said, "Listen, Damien, I've got a confession to make. Almost didn't buy that property." And I said, "Oh, really? Why is that?" He said, "Well, I went to work the next day after you presented the opportunity to me, and I told my best mate what I was doing, and he said that he'd never heard of the place, and if he'd never heard of it, it couldn't be a good place to invest." So I decided, so he said to me, I almost didn't do it. And I thought, oh, well, that's really interesting. Why did you do it? And he said, well, I called you up and I spoke to you about it. He went through the logic of it with me again, and I decided to take the plunge and do it. And I said, "And you're glad you did?" And he goes, "Well, absolutely, I wouldn't be here now." And we got him up to $2 million worth of property in 2 years. Now, he chose not to listen to that armchair expert, but this guy was his best friend for 20 years, and he came very close to not doing what he needed to do. There are people around you, including the next one, which is caring family, who are going to try and talk you out of being a property investor. Okay, they're going to try and talk you out of it, and they'll have their own reasons why, but maybe usually it's because they fear what they don't understand. Now, what we know about property investment in Australia is that we've only got 18% of taxpayers have an investment property now, which is quite interesting. It's huge, actually. When you consider half of the people are renting, so 18% of people not only have their own home, but they also have an investment property. Now, but of those people who invest in property, we know that 67% of them only have one investment property. We know that 93% of them have no more than 2. And we know it's only the top 7% who have any more than 2 investment properties. But yet, if you want to be successful, if you want to retire early and all those things, then you need to be in that top 7% of the 18% of Australians who have an investment property. So the difference between success and failure in property investment is actually there, but you need to know what you're doing, and it's not hard to do once you know it. So one of the things that we're taught wrong is about what an asset is. When you go to the bank and get your first loan, they give you a form to fill out. And that form says, list your assets and your liabilities. So you list all the things you've got that you can sell as assets, your car, your CD collection, your home and contents. You list them as assets, and then you list all your loans as liabilities. The problem is, this is the first thing that I think throws people off. An asset, your own home, your car, your CD collection, they are not assets. I'll tell you why they're not assets. They're not assets because they don't put money in your bank account. A real asset is something of value that generates an independent income. If you want to retire early, you need to have a portfolio of real assets that are paying you money without you having to work. Now, your own home doesn't do that. Even when you've paid your own home off, you will still have expenses to incur with the rates bill electricity, the maintenance, all of those things cost money. Insurance. So your house, your own home will never produce you an income. It will always be a liability. However, an investment property is totally different because there's two things you get back from the investment property that your own home doesn't bring back. The first is a rent from the tenant living in there, and the second is a big fat tax return where you claim all the associated expenses on tax. Now, that's what is so different. So other things that might be real assets are profitable businesses, a share portfolio, and the like. So if you want to be wealthy, you must understand what an asset really is. And if anyone ever tells you that their home is an asset, then tell them they're wrong. And so yes, it's something of value you can sell, but it's not going to make you financially free. You need to have stuff that is producing an income. Let's put it this way. If you had a property portfolio that was producing you an average income without you having to work, would you care that you had a mortgage on your own home? You wouldn't, would you, really? Because that passive income could service the mortgage until the day you die, and then who cares? See, the main reason why people are so passionate about paying their mortgage off is because they've got to work to pay it off. But if you've got an investment property with a rent that covers the mortgage itself, you just turn that rent back into the mortgage and it'll pay itself out. And then you'll have an asset that's producing an income where you don't have to work, and then you can use that rent to pay off your own home as well. In fact, you probably do it in that order. You do the home first and then the investment property second. So just ask yourself this question: how many assets do you own right now? How many assets do you own right now? Here's where your money problem is. If you said 0, well, there's your problem right now. How many real assets do you own? How many things do you own that put money in your bank account? If you don't own any, then there's your problem. You've got to accumulate these things. All right. Good debt versus bad debt. So a lot of people are taught that debt is bad. Now, there is a difference between good and bad debt. Okay, some debt is bad, some is good. Good debt, by definition, is debt that's used to buy assets that make you money. Bad debt is debt that's used to buy things that lose you money, like cars, jet skis, weddings, holidays, etc. Okay, but if you're using debt to buy an investment property, that's a good idea, not a bad idea, because the rent and the tax return are going to cover its bills. But you're going to hold this capital asset, this $500,000 asset, in the market. It's going to be the easiest money you ever make when it goes up in value. So you've got to avoid the poor man's mentality. You know, there's lots of things that poor people say to other poor people so they don't feel bad about being poor. Like money's the root of all evil. No, it's not. Money won't make you happy. Yes, it will. I can do it cheaper myself. And money won't make you happy. When you ever see someone miserable when they win the lotto? I can do it cheaper myself. No, you can't. Get the expert in. You'll stuff it up, okay? Or you'll spend all your spare time doing it, and you're effectively just giving yourself a part-time job. I'll screw them for a better deal. You'll screw them once, and then they'll never service you again. You know you need a team that's looking after you. You need a great mortgage broker, a great property person. You need a great researcher. You need all these people, and you need them to know, like, and trust you, so that when they find those opportunities, they're going to bend over backwards to make sure you know about them first. Top dollar rent. A lot of landlords push their rent right up as high as they can. Guess what? It's a false economy. If your tenant moves out, straight away you've lost a week's rent because you've got to pay a letting fee, a 1-week letting fee to the rental manager just for them to find you a new tenant. And then there's at least a week lost while they get the old one out, clean the place up and get the new one in. So there you've lost 2 weeks rent straight away when your existing tenant leaves. If you've got a tenant, the best thing to do is keep that tenant in your property by dropping your rent $10 to $20 below the competition. The consistency of that, $20 a week is only $1,040 a year, but how many weeks vacancy do you need in a property before you've lost $1,000 bucks? It's worth thinking about. And rent money is dead money. Now a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to rent anymore, I want to buy my own home and pay my mortgage off. That sounds right, but you know what, it's not. Because when you own your own home, you're still paying dead money. You're paying dead money in interest. And you're paying dead money in rates. You know, there's all these bills associated with owning your own home that you're still paying money to someone else. Now, when you rent a property, yes, your money's going to someone else, But you'll actually find if you do the numbers, you're better off renting than you are living in your own home. Now, a lot of people say, but then I won't have an asset. Well, yes, your own home isn't an asset, remember, but investment properties are assets. So good property investors actually rent their own home and then buy lots and lots of investment properties. So it's quite interesting. All right, just remember those things are false economy. Think of the bigger picture. Look after your team and they'll look after you. All right, will house prices keep going up? This is a fundamental assumption of all property investing, is that house prices are going to keep going up. Now, what's the difference between these two pictures? In 1960, we had 10 million population. In 2015, we had just short of 24 million. What's the difference between the two? The only difference is the population. The land's still the same size. And in very simple terms, as long as the population keeps going up, house prices are going to keep going up. Because we'll have the same land, but more people try and live on it. Quite fundamentally simple. Let's have a look at the history of house prices. Did you know that in Brisbane in 1970 you could buy a house for $8,500? But people were on $2,000 a year income. So if you're on $2,000 a year income and you're trying to buy an $8,500 home, you're freaking out, right? You're scared. You're like, how am I ever going to pay this off? But what happens is inflation's what happens. You know, life goes on, markets go up. And the 10 years that followed 1970, that house quadrupled in value. And then in the 1980s, it tripled in value. And during the 1990s, when we had the recession we had to have, it almost doubled still. And then in the 2000s, it more than doubled. And now we're seeing Brisbane launch into its boom phase, and the next 5 years will be quite strong in Brisbane, I'm no doubt. You look at Sydney, 18,000 in 1970, 3.5 time increase in 1980, tripled in the 90s, correction in the 80s, almost doubled in the 90s, almost doubled in the 2000s, and now it's just had a massive boom over the last 2 years. So you can see there's a pattern there across the board. What you've got to understand though is if you're going to be a property investor or investor of any kind, you must understand the commodity curve. You must understand that prices are flat, boom, they follow. It's not a straight line. So you have periods of time when supply equals demand. So in housing, you're going to have plenty of time where the number of houses available is going to equal the number of people who want them. There'll be no prices going up, there'll be no prices going down. Then something will trigger a boom. Now a boom occurs when supply is less than demand, or demand is greater than supply. Now what can trigger that relationship where demand is greater than supply? Well, it can either be an increase in demand or it can be a reduction in supply. Pretty simple really. So what we can do is, if we want to be a successful property investor, we go looking for those factors that affect the supply and demand of housing. And then when we find those places where those factors are occurring, we invest there. And then we make lots of money. Inevitably though, what will happen is that price will peak, because what happens when the boom starts is people start making more of the product that people want. So they gear up their production, and we've just seen this with coal and iron ore mining in the last 10 years in Australia. There's a massive boom, so they expanded the number of mines and started growing and growing and growing. And then inevitably they've oversupplied the demand, and there's been a peak in the price and then a correction. And that's what we've just seen. For iron ore and coal, it's actually been very steep, the correction. But for everything else, real estate is very gentle usually when a correction occurs. Now the key thing to remember here is don't take the short path, the short view, okay? If you try and invest within one cycle, then you get it wrong, you might buy there and sell there. But if you think about multiple cycles and you plan on never selling, well then you're going to win. You're almost guaranteed to win if you never sell. So one of the main rules of all property investors is never sell. Never ever sell. If you never sell, you won't lose. When the wind changes direction, don't catch a cold. Now if the market starts correcting, don't worry about it. It does that. It's routine. Alright, so equity. What is equity and what's available equity? So equity is the difference between a property's value and the mortgage on it. Available equity though is the amount of equity that we can use to borrow more from the property. So let's say for example we bought this property for $400,000 and we had a $320,000 mortgage on it, and then the property went up in value to $500,000. Well, we have this thing called LVR limit, which is the most money the bank will lend us against the property. In this case, it's 90%, which is 450. So this space in here, but below the LVR limit, is what we call available equity. And in this case, there's $130,000 of equity we could access if we wanted to buy another investment property. We could use that money as a deposit and cost. We can go around the world on a holiday. We can, buy that fancy car we want. We can pay the school fees for the best school in town for the kids. There's lots and lots of things we can do. That's available equity. And if you're going to be a property investor, you need to understand what your available equity is at all times and how you can use it. Just remember, if you go over 80%, you will be charged lender's mortgage insurance. And we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so how to build a portfolio both safely and quickly. There's two golden rules to property investing. Buy where it's booming and make sure your properties pay for themselves. If you buy your properties where the market's moving, you're going to make money. If you buy your properties where the market is not moving, you're going to come to a grinding halt, and that'll be the last property you buy for a long time. It really just makes sense. It's not complicated. So the problem is, though, most people will buy locally, and most people's markets aren't necessarily in the boom cycle. So this is where most property investors go wrong. They're buying in completely the wrong spot, and then they're on ice for several years while they wait for the market in that area to pick up again. The second rule is to make sure your properties pay for themselves. If your properties pay for themselves, you can own an unlimited number of properties. If your properties don't pay for themselves, let's say they cost you $100 a week of your own money, well then how many of those properties can you own? If you break rule number 2, then what will happen is your portfolio will get no bigger than 1 or 2 properties, as those properties consume your disposable income. If you follow rule number 2, your portfolio will be massive. It's a golden rule for a reason. Don't break it. So earlier in the webinar, I asked the question, what would you do if you won 500 grand? Let's run through some scenarios and see what we would get if we do that. Okay, now the good old-fashioned way would have been to pay cash for a house. So if you said you wanted to pay your mortgage off, or you're going to buy a house, pay cash for it, then let's see what scenario would have happened. Now in D number of years, and D stands for double, however many years it takes for the property to double in value, and we know in the 70s it quadrupled, in the 80s it tripled, in the 90s it almost doubled, last decade it doubled, and we're tracking for a double this decade. But if we just say D is D, whatever it may be, then this property is now twice its value, 480 up to 960. And because we didn't have a mortgage, maybe we saved 200 grand over that time, and we've got a net worth of 1.16. Now, the problem here is, can we retire? The answer is no, we can't, because where's our passive income? So we may be worth $1.16 million, but to get to that money, we have to sell the house. And those 200 grand of savings won't last long in retirement, especially in 10 years from now. So if you follow the advice of the people around you, you're not necessarily going to end up in a very good position. Conversely, what would a conservative property investor do? Well, if they won 500,000 in the lotto, they go and buy 4 houses. Put 100 grand deposit down on each and 20 grand for costs. That spends $480,000 and 20 grand left over. Portfolio is worth $2 million. They've got $1.6 million of good debt associated with the property. They then rent the 3 other properties out, and they live in the first one and use their income to service their own mortgage and use the rents to service the mortgages on the investment properties. And let's just say that they've bought those properties at a point where the costs are equaling the rent received. What happens to that same investor in that same period of time, D number of years? Well, of course, all the properties double in value as per the first example. So they've got $1 million properties. In the first example, that one property was 960, so it's close to $1 million. The loan, the worst case scenario for the loans is that it's $400,000, and it's been interest only the whole time. We haven't paid a red cent off. And you'll also note that if the properties are doubled in value, so have the rents. So where are we now? Well, when I went to school, $4 million worth of property minus $1.6 million worth of good debt was $2.4 million. Now you recall in the first scenario that we were only worth $1.16 million and we had no passive income. So the first benefit of this is we are now worth twice as much money if we sold it. But the second benefit is the rent has doubled. And the costs have gone up with inflation, but now we've got a passive income. And that passive income is the start of our retirement fund. My dad would say to me now though, he'd say, well, that's well and good, son, but you still got a mortgage on your own property. And that's true. If I wanted to pay my mortgage off, well, it'd be really easy to do at this point in time. I could just go and get a second mortgage on the first investment property for the same money, and then use the funds from that mortgage and pay that mortgage off, and then my own home would be unencumbered. So what would the aggressive property investor do? 90% loans, 7 houses, and then we'd add the mortgage insurance to the loan, 465. 3.5 million portfolio with a 3.2 million good debt. Why would we do that? 7 houses that are all breaking even, D number of years, houses are worth $1 million, loans haven't changed, portfolio is now 7 million, 7 minus 3.25, 5 is 3.745. So as you can see, we're much better off by leveraging. The question is not should you buy as much property as possible, the question is can you buy as much property as possible? How do you buy as much property as possible? And how do you hang on to it without getting stung? These are the real questions you need to ask yourself. The more property you have, the more money you make. But the question is how you're going to hang on to it and how you're going to protect yourself. But the beauty about this too is look at our passive income now. We can retire now, can't we? But what if you don't have 500,000 to invest in property? What if you have to start from scratch? How would you do it? Now I'm very serious about this. If I had to start from scratch, the first thing I'd do is go to a family member and I'd ask them for the money. I'd ask them for the money to buy the deposit, to pay the deposit and the cost on the house, and then I go to the bank and get a 90% loan for the rest of it in my own name. But if no one loved me enough, then I would simply go and for 1 year of my 80-something years on this world, I would live like an absolute pauper. I'd have a full-time day job, part-time night job, live in a caravan park or board one room in someone's house, and I would just work my backside off for 1 year until I had a deposit in my account, because I know what's possible. See, once you own your first property, you don't need to ever save money again because the portfolio will make your money for you. So let's say we bought that property and then later it's gone up in value to 470. The 90% line is now 423 and the mortgage is still the same at 360. But now we have this available equity what we can use to pay the deposit costs on a new property. So once you've got that first property, you don't need cash anymore. Once you've got that first property, you can just leapfrog from one to the next. And one property will give birth to another, but then that first property will continue to go up in value, but then the second property will do it as well. So 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16, 32, 64, etc. That's how you build your empire. It's slow to start sometimes. Sometimes you might buy a property and you might not have done your research very well, and you might end up having to wait a couple of years. That's okay, because when you've got 2 properties, you can then spread them out, increase your chances of picking up some capital growth somewhere, and reduce your chances of having vacancy across your portfolio. So how do properties reduce our tax? Well, in this example here, we've got a property up in the top right corner, which is worth 500,000 and it's got a 9% mortgage on it, and it's running at 500 a week. On the left-hand side, we've got our tax brackets as they currently stand, and the income tax is actually in the top bracket. There's extra 2% debt levy now. So let's say we earn 100 grand a year. Now, throughout the year, our employer is paying tax on our behalf on the assumption that we will only earn $100,000. But if we own an investment property, we actually have to add the rent to our taxable income. So at this point in time, we actually have a gross taxable income of 126, and if we didn't have any deductions, that taxable income, we would have a tax bill. But then we get to claim all the things on tax of our investment property, the loan interest, the rates, the rental management fees, insurance. All of these things are what we call cash deductions, and they are what we can use to claim back on tax. But the secret sauce is this thing called depreciation. Depreciation is the government allows us to write off the diminishing value of the building itself. Now, the real estate asset is not really going down in value, but on paper it is. But there's a key difference between these cash deductions and non-cash deductions. For cash deductions, $1 has to leave my bank account for me to claim 37% back. But for depreciation, no money leaves my bank account and I can claim a third of it back. So I can make a $15,000 deduction on a brand new 4-bedroom home in its first full tax year and get $5,000 back in my tax return. That's an extra $100 a week of return that property is now getting me. And that might be the difference of whether we're positive cash flow or negative cash flow. So in this case, all these deductions, the rent might have put our income up, but the deductions have driven our income down below where it was before to $83,000. Now we have a taxable income return that we can use, and we get about $5,500 in our tax. Okay, depreciation is the secret sauce to making things work. Okay, should you rent or should you buy your own home? This is always a big question. Now, if you went out and did a straw poll in the street, most people would tell you that you should buy your own home if you can. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're right, does it? Let's just see. So Bob and John live side by side. They've got identical houses, they just like different coloured paint. They've got the same value, same mortgages, etc. The market goes up 10%, both of them will make $40,000 in capital growth. They're paying the same amount of interest, same amount of rate, same amount of insurance, etc. John says to Bob, hey Bob, I went to this training thing by Damien Patterson and he said that we're better off renting. Why don't we swap houses? I'll live in your house, you live in mine. Bob agrees. Now their properties are actually investment properties, not principal places of residence. And all those expenses that they're incurring, they can now claim on tax. Now you'll notice the introduction of a rental management fee. They decide to go and get a rental manager to keep it going for them and to settle any disputes that they might have. So at first, Bob's paid $400 to John. At first, Bob's actually a bit pissed off about that. He rings John up and he says, John, what is this all about? This is not right. I'm paying rent now. That's dead money. Why am I giving you $400? And, this is rubbish. I want to get back into my own home. And John says, well, hang on a sec. Something amazing is about to occur. Don't worry about that $400 you just paid me. I'll pay it back to you. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, well, I've got to pay you rent for your place. And if you're paying me rent and I'm paying you rent, well, that cancels out, doesn't it? So therefore, you're better off renting, because if you're only going to own one house, you either own a house that you've got to pay everything, or you own a house that's tax deductible. You see, but your parents won't tell you to do that. Your parents will tell you to buy your own home and live in it. But I just say to people, if your parents are filthy rich, then don't talk to me. Go talk to your parents. But if they're not, you need to get your education elsewhere. Therefore, there's 4 phases to property investment. Save, save, save. This is when we don't have any property yet. We're going to live a Spartan existence, save like crazy, and learn everything we can about property. Then we're going to have the money at the end of that to buy our first property. We're going to buy that property not where we need to live. We're going to buy that property, that one property, where we've got the best chance of success. The first homeowners grant, I believe, is a bit of a trap for some people, because you must buy a property locally. But it's only $7, $10 or whatever. That's peanuts when you're talking about $500,000 property. But if to get that $7 or $10 shapes you to buy in the wrong market, then the opportunity cost is massive. You might be on ice for 3 to 5 years before your market moves. And who knows what you could have made on another property in another town, in another city, that was in the right stage of the market. So we buy where it's booming and we rent where we want to live. We leverage from one to the next. We buy as much property as possible. We keep ourselves neutral or negative geared before tax, but we must be positive cash flow once all the bills are paid. We must have more money in the bank account that come in from the property than went out. After a while, we do need to stop buying, because every time we refinance a property to rip the equity out, we actually increase the debt on that property and therefore the expenses it incurs, and the increased rent will be consumed paying for the new loan that was used to buy the deposit and costs for the next property. So we do at some stage have to stop accumulating and just sit on our portfolio and let those rents go up a couple of $100 a week per property, and then all that combined gives us a nice big chunky income. And then we get to freedom retirement. That's where we live off the surplus rents, have fun, do whatever we want, remind our friends that they should have listened to you when you said, let's invest in property. All right, so I might just check in at this stage. How am I going? Please put in your question box the score out of 10 and tell me where you're calling in from, where you're watching from today. You see there just on your go-to webinar. Yep, great. Great, thank you. Wonderful. Right, only 7 out of 10. I better lift my game. Okay, right, great. I'll keep going. All right, now what happens later when you do retire is actually your income from your portfolio will keep going up, up, up and up. So when you get to a certain point in retirement, you will actually be able to start buying houses again purely on the strength of your passive income alone. So then where should you buy your properties? Well, we've concluded that there's 4 primary factors that affect price growth in a property. They are the supply of land in that area, the supply of labour to build houses in that area, population growth and wage growth. So people with jobs buy houses, so it's important that we've got population growth, lots of jobs being created, and then if there's too much land, they just keep releasing more and more blocks and we don't see any land price increases. Labour supply as well can drive prices up because if there's a shortage of labour, the labour that is there will charge more when it comes to building a property. And second of all, it will trigger the next point below it, which is population growth, as big companies will then seek to move people from interstate to solve the labour problem. Once we've worked out where we're going to buy, then what property should we buy in that area? Well, our answer is to buy new, middle of the market residential homes. Why is that? Well, commercial lending can be good, and when you've got a tenant, commercial lending is great. Tenants pay a higher rental yield. They have to pay the rate, all sorts of things. But the problem with commercial is that you can only borrow 60% of the money. So if you can only borrow 60% of the money, that means you've got to put a 40% deposit into one property. Why would you do that when you could buy 4 residential homes of the same value, have 4 times as much value of portfolio, and have 4 separate locations and spread your risk of having a vacancy, increase your chances of picking up some capital growth because you've got 4 bases covered instead of 1. There's also shorter vacancies in residential properties because how many people are looking for a 12-bedroom home today versus how many people are looking for an office to rent? So the vacancy periods with residential property are much shorter than commercial. And also the interest rates applied to lending are much less. Okay, stay away from the low end of the market. We talked about that's where your tenants from hell are. It's also where you get a lot of maintenance bills. The older houses are often in the lower end of the market and they cost a lot of money to maintain. So on one hand you might think you're getting a good rental yield, but on the other hand you're spending all that money on maintaining the property. So where you want to be is in the middle of the bell-shaped curve. If you're in the middle of the bell-shaped curve, there will always be demand for your property and your cash flow will be maintained in a sound way. Better tenants. What sort of people move into a brand new 4-bedroom home in a new estate? Families, right? And who are the most likely to stay in a house the longest period of time? Families. So as a purely financial decision, you want to have consistency of the rent being paid and you want the tenant to stay there as long as possible. Put a family in there, the only reason they're going to leave is if they job post them or they finally save enough money to buy their own home. Builder's warranty, structural guarantees and low maintenance costs. When you buy a brand new residential home, it comes with builder's warranty for 6 months and a structural guarantee for 7 in Queensland and the other states that have similar policies. Also, the ongoing maintenance costs will be quite low because everything's brand new in the early years. If you buy an older property, don't be surprised if you then start having to fork out large amounts of money to keep the property maintained. I was talking to a client earlier last night and he just painted his house, cost him $10,000. $10,000 in a year is $200 a week. If you've got a property renting for $500 a week and it needs to be painted that year, well, there's 2/5 of its revenue gone. One year it might be the painting, next year it might be the carpet, next year it might be air conditioners, next year it might be restumping, next year it might be the wallpaper. There's all these different issues. The older a house gets. And why houses and not townhouses and apartments? Well, primarily because of body corporate. Now, body corporate costs you an arm and a leg. Whenever you buy an apartment or a townhouse, you have to be in the body corporate committee as an owner, and then you have to contribute money towards it. Now, unfortunately, the problem is in most of them, you don't get a return on that investment. So that is an expense you incur, but you don't get any more back from the renter for that. So often body corporate fees will ruin your cash flow. So it's a good idea to stay away from apartments and townhouses and buy houses. Rookie mistakes and how to avoid them. Don't buy nearby unless you live in Australia's #1 property investment hotspot. Stay away from negative gearing, negative cash flow. Make sure your properties are paying for themselves. A lot of people say, I don't mind having negatively geared property because it's strong capital growth. Well, that's fine, but you're only going to own one. And if you might get 10% capital growth that year, but the guy who's got 5 houses getting 5% is still in front. Okay? The cash flow is the most critical thing. Not using a cash buffer. It's really important that you preserve cash. I say to people 3 months mortgage payments per property. If you're in a perfect storm where everything's vacant, your cash reserves can absorb that blow. About 10 grand per property is a good rule of thumb, but it's just my opinion, and obviously it's how long a piece of string. You could have a whole range of scenarios. The more money you got, the better. Don't go with the same bank. As you build your portfolio, if you stay with the same bank, you're going to come to a grinding halt and they're going to stop lending you money and no one else will lend you money because you're too exposed to the first bank. It's really important that you have a top gun broker who is doing your finances for you and strategically selecting which bank they're going to put you with and not getting expert help. Don't be so arrogant to think that you can do it all on your own. Think about this. Think about the job you do. Let's say you're an engineer and I say to you, I can build that bridge or I can build that power station. How hard can it be? You would think I'm crazy. Well, don't underestimate property investment either because it's quite a, it's quite a lucrative business when you get in it, but you've got to know what you're doing. And if you don't get expert help, then if things don't go your way, you're probably going to deserve what happens. Make sure you get the help you need. And this time I'll take any questions on the webinar. If you've got a question, you need to type it in the question box. Okay. Right, last chance. No questions? Great. Good. Okay, well, it's always good when we're not getting any questions through. Must mean we're doing a good job. If you do have any more questions, feel free to make an appointment with us and we can go right through all your personal situation and answer any questions you might have. And just remember, how many assets do you own right now? How many assets do you own right now? How many real assets that put money in your bank account? Okay? If you don't have any, that's where your financial problems have started. You're working for money, but you have no assets. Where to from here if you want more help? Well, you've got 3 options really. Do nothing and continue to struggle or whatever path you're on. Second option is take what you've learned here today and decide to try and do it all yourself. The third option is to take what you learned here today and follow a step-by-step process of achieving your goals with us. You've got to ask yourself, what's your own time worth? We all get the same amount of time. You get 24 hours in a day. You're probably spending 8 of them asleep, probably spending 8 of them at your work, and then you're probably spending another 2 in commuting to and from work, in getting ready for work, and then you're spending time, probably half an hour at breakfast, an hour at dinner. There's not much left over. So you probably only got 3 or so hours of free time a day to do anything you want to do. And how much is that time worth to you in terms of recreation, having fun and just experiencing good quality of life? But yet a lot of people want to try and do it all on their own. the work that we do, obviously we have many clients, so we're able to leverage all our resources and achieve exponential results for our clients. If you were going to try and research locations, acquisition processes, develop the risk management strategies, liaise with all the various sellers, builders, identify suitable property, there's at least 110 hours of work there, at least. If you're then going to conduct due diligence on a suitable mortgage broker, solicitor, financial planner, accountant, building inspector, insurance broker, rental manager and quantity surveyor, there's at least 20 hours work just trying to find all those people and checking their backgrounds, checking references, all those sorts of things. There's at least 20 hours of work there. We do that for you. And then you receive, review, process any paperwork associated with the deal, communicate with your stakeholders during the settlement process, monitor construction if you're building your property, schedule your progress payments, at least 30 hours of work there as well. It's a total of 160 hours. Now we do all that for you. Why would you want to try and do all that on your own? This is a process we'll take you through. First of all, it starts with the coaching and mentoring, one-on-one coaching session with me, go through your situation. We'll also, once we've identified we've got a plan together, we'll then execute that plan. That starts with the research briefing to identify where we want to invest. We then go and find properties in that area. We make sure we've got a risk management plan squared away, and we make sure that all the paperwork is in order. We then go and get the professional service we need to help us do that, mortgage brokers and solicitors. And if we're buying in a self-managed super fund, we will go and talk to a self-managed super fund person first and make sure you get all the appropriate advice about what that means before you do anything at all. Then once the plan is underway, we have a client care department that takes care of you, organising building inspections on your behalf, contacting you and rental managers, making sure everything's okay, sourcing appropriate insurances for you, ensuring that you have an appreciation schedule to claim your expenses on tax, keeping you up to date during every step of any build process, and also making sure your property's handed over correctly. Once you've done all that, we then go back to the start and we do a review and repeat. Go back to your original goals and the plan. We repeat the process, adjust it and repeat as required. That process takes about 6 months. How much is all that worth to you? One of my favourite sayings is a fool learns from by experience. A wise person profits from the experience of others. Bismarck said that. Okay, so you've got a choice. You can try and do it the hard way, or you can get a team behind you. Now, this is a team that we have. We have myself as your coach and strategist. We have Robbie, who's the senior property consultant, and his job is to make sure that everything you need is looked after for you. Then we have Paige, and Paige assists Robbie with a whole heap of things, and you might have even spoken to Paige potentially on the phone. And then we've got Dave. Dave's our research and property selection manager. So he's the guy, when you need a property, we send Dave out to go and get it for you. We've got Amanda as the client care manager. Her job is to look after you through the whole acquisition process. Then we've got Rochelle, who's our Top Gun mortgage broker. And all of these services that you require, we'll be able to assist you in. Either we'll provide them for you ourselves, or we will give you a very good recommendation of who to work with that we've worked with before and does a good job. In your one-on-one appointment, your story so far, get to know you. I want to confirm your goals. I want a full review of your situation. Then we'll review what options you have available and make a plan to achieve those goals, and I'll give you the full support in doing that. Now, to do that strategy session costs $497. If you take action today, we only charge $297, and it's 100% guaranteed. So basically what that means is if you have the appointment and you feel that it was a waste of your time, you can just ask to have your money back, and we'll, no questions asked, refund it. However, very few people do that. In fact, I can only think of 2 people in the last 6 years who've done that, and it broke my heart that they did it too. But there's over 1,000 who haven't, so I'm confident you won't be disappointed. Fully support you for life, and then surround you with the right people so you can take control and take action. Don't forget to find us on social media. We have a Facebook page. If you search for Integrity Property Education, you'll see us there. You'll find us on LinkedIn, Google+, and we also at our website. You can subscribe to our blog, And also, if you haven't read our book, Save Us Houses, you can download it from the website. Just go to ipedu.com.au. And that's it. If you'd like to have an appointment with us, all you need to do is put appointment please in your question box, and the GoToWebinar program records your email and your number, I think. So just all you need to do is put your details in there, and we'll contact you afterwards. Okay, that's it for the webinar. I see Brian has just joined us. G'day, Brian. Perhaps there's been some confusion on the timing, so I do apologise for that, Brian. But I'm willing to have a chat to you separately, Brian, about your situation. I might give you a call. If you would like me to give you a call, Brian, just say in your little comments question box there, just put yes, please. Otherwise, I'll just leave you alone and won't bother you. Right, that's it today for today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy property investing, and I wish you the greatest success. Thank you.